Hello, and welcome to Real Person Reviews. I'm Sam, and I'm a real person, and today I want to talk to you about Castlevania for the Nintendo Entertainment System. A few things up front about this one. I just want to mention that I have played it both on the actual NES and also on the Game Boy Advance. In fact, I believe the footage you'll be seeing is the Game Boy Advance port of the NES game. It tries to remain faithful to that. And I want to point out, I have at least seen all of this game multiple times, but, it happens sometimes where I'm a real person, and sometimes games are just too hard. You're not able to beat them. And I wanted to talk about this game. I don't want to have to just leave it at, I couldn't beat it, and I guess I can't review it. So I decided to review it anyways, and hopefully that's okay. And also there's going to be a written review you can check out. It's in the description, so just want to get all that out of the way up front, so you're not just yelling at me at the end of it and saying that this whole thing is pointless. You can do that right off the bat and save yourself all that time. Other than that, I think we're ready to go, so let's try to jump into this son of a fuck. So Castlevania is a 2D platformer, side-scrolling platformer, and the plot really isn't explained in the game anywhere. I think you'd have to look in a booklet or something for it. So, basically, the idea is, to put it simply, you're playing as Simon Belmont, who is part of this family of vampire hunters. You have a legendary whip called the Vampire Killer. And your quest is to go out and try and defeat Dracula, who is the big bad guy. He's the one who, basically all the other monsters in the game take orders from him. And you go through it in a pretty linear fashion, where you go through these levels. At the end of every level is a boss. You beat the boss, you go to the next level. And every level consists of multiple stages, so if you die, you get reset to each stage as a checkpoint until you run out of lives, and then you can either just quit or you can choose to continue, and you'll start over at the beginning of the level. And you have to go through those stages of that level again, so that's kind of how the checkpoint system works. Controls are pretty simple. You can move left and right, you can duck, you can jump, and you can attack with your whip. And that's most of what you do. You can also use sub-weapons, which sometimes drop from enemies, sometimes from candles that you're destroying that are in the background. You destroy them by hitting it with your whip. And you use the sub-weapons by holding up and hitting the attack button. And there's stuff like, there's a throwing knife that just goes straight across the screen. There's an axe that arcs pretty high up and then arcs back down. There's holy water that kind of just goes down, but it also leaves a little effect there for a few seconds. It persists on the ground. There's a stopwatch that can temporarily stop enemies and time in general for just a few seconds. And like a cross that you can throw like a boomerang. And every time you use these, they use up hearts. You collect from also, killing enemies sometimes, but usually from destroying the candles. So that's like your ammunition, and depending on what item it is, it takes a certain amount of hearts to use. There's also a few items you can pick up, like there's like a potion that makes you temporarily invulnerable. There's also like this necklace with like a crucifix on it that will instantly kill all enemies that are on the screen currently when you touch it. There's the upgrades to your whip, where they just kind of look like a whip. So you start off with this little leather whip. The first upgrade turns it into a chain whip. The second upgrade turns it into a longer chain whip, and then you're fully upgraded on your whip. And then a lot of times things will drop money bags. and depending on the color of the money bag, whatever, it's worth different amounts of points. Getting enough points will net you extra lives, so there's that. And you can also find these Roman numerals. Like if you have an item, a sub-weapon, and you pick up a Roman numeral 2, it means that you can have 2 of them on screen at a time rather than only one of them being able to exist on the screen at a time. And then you can also find a Roman numeral 3 to make 3 things exist, so that's what those do. You can find meat to heal yourself. Usually the meat is typically hidden inside of breakable walls that you just kind of have to find. There's also a timer on each stage, so that if you run out of time, you'll lose. If you take too much damage, you'll die. And if you fall into a bottomless pit, you'll die, and there's knockback when you get hit. What else I forget? I'm explaining a lot, but there's not a whole lot left to it here. Basically, then at the end of each level, you fight a boss, and most of the enemies are like some more typical horror things, like skeletons and bats and whatnot. Most of the bosses are usually based on some kind of more famous kind of monster, like fighting like Frankenstein's monster is one of the bosses. And Death is one of the bosses. Medusa is one of the bosses. You know, so you have bosses like that, and they're usually pretty tough. Is the idea. I feel like I'm forgetting a thing, but maybe I am not. Except for, yes, I am. The one thing I wanted to also bring up quick was the way the controls work, because while it sounds pretty simple, basically the thing is like you can only whip straight ahead. That's the only way you can attack. You can whip, when you're standing, when you're crouching. You can whip during a jump. You can also use sub-weapons during a jump as well, if you'd like. But things with your jumps is that they're all they're like fixed jumps. You always jump the same height. You don't have any control over your height or distance or anything like that. Basically, it's that if you are not moving and you jump, you'll jump straight up in place. If you're moving in a direction, left or right, when you jump, you'll be committed to doing that full jump. That way you can't change your momentum or anything in midair. And that's important to note as well. But that's pretty much the game, is going through lots of these different levels with these the tricky level design, trying to take out enemies or avoid enemies when possible, and defeating the bosses. Eventually you'll have a face-off with Dracula. You beat Dracula, you beat the game. And it's great. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about the game. The music is awesome. I think visually it's very colorful, especially for like a horror game. But it looks really cool, and they do a lot of at least enough stylized like looks for a lot of the enemies and bosses and such, to the point where there's at least enough style there where it doesn't just feel like super generic and lame. Also, like the way you control in here is really cool, because at first it seems like it's stiff, but it works super well because it's difficult to get good at it, but also because all the controls, everything is so consistent, everything that happens is so consistent. The enemies are in the same places, you're going to pretty much be finding the same stuff most of the time, and the way you control and where the enemies are, at the very least, are always going to be the same. So, because of that, if you die, it's never like, oh man, the game fucked me over. It always just kind of feels like you didn't know what was coming yet. You weren't sure how to tackle the thing you knew was coming yet. Or you knew both of those things and just tackled it incorrectly. You made a mistake. So it kind of falls on you. It doesn't feel like it was something you didn't have a chance at. It doesn't feel unfair or cheap, even if it does get pretty goddamn hard. And that's also why a lot of the sub-weapons are like useful. It's because, you kind of need those to handle certain enemies and situations, and especially bosses can be really helpful for handling them when you're not really very well equipped to do it without those things. It makes a lot of situations a lot easier, and it's interesting how well it works with your very limited controls, how they kind of factor that in and make it worth your while to get those things. So it's awesome. Like, a lot of the stuff, it's kind of crazy too, because it's like, oh, it's this hard game with a lot of, either generic or at least unoriginal, enemies being tossed in there. You would, and like the limited controls. It just feels like a lot of these things should work against it, and in a worse game they definitely would, but they just nail them so well, and it's just kind of awesome that they work with this game. And that's not to say there aren't problems, though. I mean, there are like a few things that are maybe a little more nitpicky on this one, but like the points thing is kind of lame, because like you have infinite continues. If you get more lives, you can start from that part of the stage rather than going back to the beginning of the level more times, I suppose. But there's nothing that really saves your high scores here. It's not like that really matters much in the grand scheme of it, especially with unlimited continues. So, that's not really. It's not really. It makes the point bags and such kind of lame. And yeah, some of the enemies, you could say is like they're kind of generic and unoriginal. There's always that. That's gonna be there. That's unfortunately something that sort of taints the game a little bit. Not that they necessarily needed to all be super original and whatnot, but that's still a point. I think that's a valid point. There's no saving either. Which, I mean, that's fine. There's not necessarily like an ability to save. It's not a super long game if you are good at it, I guess. But the thing that's kind of bothersome is there's no password system either. So it's like if you have to shut the system off, it's like, well, I guess you got to do all that over again tomorrow because you can't save it anymore, or just leave the system on overnight. At least with the Game Boy Advance one, there is sort of a save-ish system where it kind of is supposed to save where you left off, but when I did it, it seems to always only start me at stage 4. So I don't know. No matter what I do, it always just says you can continue at stage 4 or start a new game when I turn it on. So either like the battery's dead and that feature like just doesn't work properly or something, or I don't understand what constitutes what constitutes getting that next checkpoint and doing that. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know. So there are some issues with the game. It's not a lot though, not tons. Overall, Castlevania is it's really fun. I don't have the NES one on me. I just have this classic NES series version of it. Is the one I played on more anyways. But yeah, I mean, it's a game that I could see beating someday. I just need to try it a ton of times and get either really into the groove of it or get lucky. And I haven't had that happen. The furthest I've gotten is that hallway right before fighting death, and I just can't beat the son of a bitch. But hey, if you haven't played Castlevania, you should at least try it. It's great for around Halloween, right? And just classic. It's a classic. It's a great NES game to have if you're a fan of NES games or classics in general for games. Is a good one. If you're into the series, this is nice to see where it started. I don't know. It's a game that I think, depending on the system you find it for, it could be worth, anywhere from like $20 to $30. I would say, for what you're getting and how fun it'll be, and there's got to be something to it. If it's I've played this game how many times, I've never beaten it. I pretty much am always defeated by it. I'm getting my ass kicked by it, and I'm still this game's really fun. There's got to be something there, if that can still happen. But hey, what do you guys think? That's another thing I'd like to know. What do you guys think of Castlevania? Which Castlevania is your favorite of the NES ones? Which ones do you like? Also, you can do that. A grand scheme of them, NES ones, classic Castlevania ones, whatever. Have a field day in those comments if you want. I don't know. I don't even know what to ask. Also, have you beaten? If you've played Castlevania, have you beaten it? And okay, if you have, good on you, because you're boy, you're at least better at the game than I am, and I'm a real person. So that's at least something. It is not nothing. Castlevania. We'll just pretend that I totally finished off Dracula here. It's not like he ever came back or nothing. Right?